What if Bob Marley had listened to the dawn of 2026? A Peaceful Life. Reimagined Section 1. The morning began the way gentle mornings often do, not with noise, not with urgency, not with the sharp feeling that something had already gone wrong, but with wind. A soft wind moved through tall grass outside a wooden home set on a green hillside in Jamaica. It passed through banana leaves and along the quiet line of old stone walls. It touched the hibiscus flowers first, then the window frame, then the thin white curtain that lifted and fell like a slow breath. Beyond the house, the land rolled downward in warm green folds, and farther still, the sea waited in the distance, silver blue under the early light. The sky was pale at first, a tender kind of pale, the kind that belongs only to the hour before the world fully wakes. And in that soft hour, before voices rose, before radios clicked on, before the roads remembered their purpose, there was only bird song and the long hush of morning air. Inside the room, Bob Marley was awake. Not suddenly, not with a start, but slowly, as if he had risen through sleep the same way the sun rose through mist. He lay still for a while listening, to the breeze, to a rooster far away, to the small sounds of a house that knew him well. The floorboards had their own language. The old wood held warmth from yesterday and memory from many years before that. Somewhere in another room, a kettle had not yet begun to sing, but seemed ready to. Somewhere outside, footsteps crossed the yard, light and unhurried. A gate opened, then closed again. Bob kept his eyes on the ceiling for a moment longer. The ceiling was simple, white, a little uneven, honest. Morning light rested there in soft gold patches. He watched them, and he smiled. Because sometimes the day did not need to announce itself with grandeur. Sometimes it was enough that it had arrived at all. He turned his head toward the window. The curtain moved again. The world beyond it was waiting, but not demanding. That was the beauty of this hour. Nothing pushed, nothing grabbed, nothing shouted for attention. The earth simply offered itself, and if you were quiet enough, you could receive it. Bob sat up slowly, feeling the familiar stiffness in his back and shoulders. Not unpleasant, just real. The kind of stiffness that comes with years lived fully. The kind that says, yes, you have been here a while now. Yes, this body has carried songs, children, laughter, travel, grief, dancing, healing, work, and time. He placed both feet on the floor, and for a moment he simply sat there breathing, in, out, in, out. The room held the peace of someone who had learned at last that peace was not a place you reached once and kept forever. It was something you practiced, something you returned to, something as small as placing your feet on the floor in the morning and thanking life, without words, for one more day. Outside, the first sunlight was beginning to warm the leaves. He stood and crossed the room, opening the window wider. The scent came in at once. Wet earth, salt on the air, green things waking. A trace of wood smoke from somewhere below the hill. The island was breathing too. He leaned on the frame and looked out. The yard was quiet except for a few hens pecking at the ground. A mango tree stood not far from the house, full and patient, its branches holding both shade and memory. Beyond it, the hills stretched outward like folded cloth. There were places on this land he had walked when he was young, places he had walked in joy, and places he had walked while carrying worry like a stone in the chest. But this morning, the land looked back at him with the same calm face it always had, as if to say, "You are still here," and that, all by itself, was a miracle. Because in this version of the world, in this quiet turning of history, Bob Marley had lived. He had lived through the thin and uncertain years. He had lived through healing. He had lived through fear and through the slow rebuilding that comes after fear. He had lived to see the old century close its tired eyes and the new one begin. He had lived to watch children become parents. He had lived to sit at long tables surrounded by family. He had lived long enough to become not only a voice in the wind, but a man in a chair by the window watching the morning arrive. And now, in 2026, he was no longer the burning young prophet on a stage beneath the blazing lights. He was something quieter, something softer, something perhaps even deeper. He was an elder, not the distant kind, not the cold kind, but the kind who still laughed from the belly, the kind who still walked barefoot in the yard, the kind who knew that wisdom was not found in sounding important, but in noticing simple things, the warmth of tea in your hands, the way grief changes shape over time, the sound of children arguing, then forgiving each other 5 minutes later, the strange comfort of old songs heard from another room. He closed the window halfway and dressed slowly. A loose shirt, soft trousers, no hurry. His movements had music in them even now. Not performance, just rhythm. The rhythm of someone who had spent a life listening. To drums, yes. To bass lines, yes. But also to rain on zinc roofs, to market chatter, to the silence after hard conversations, to the ocean at night when no one was speaking at all. As he buttoned his shirt, he thought about the morning ahead. Not in a list, not in a schedule, just in shapes. Tea on the veranda, a conversation with family, perhaps a visit from grandchildren later. Maybe music in the afternoon, if the mood came. A small walk at sunset. A quiet evening. The beauty of age, he had learned, was not that life became easy. It did not. Bodies still ached. The world still confused itself. People still forgot what mattered and chased what did not. There was still sorrow, still injustice, still loneliness in hidden places. But age, when it was kind, taught you where not to spend your spirit. It taught you that not every noise deserved your nerves. It taught you that some storms passed better if you did not run into them. It taught you that love could be steady, not just intense. That joy could be soft, not only bright. That a peaceful day was not a small day. It was a sacred thing. When he stepped out onto the veranda, the boards were cool beneath his feet. The morning had widened. Light pooled over the hillside now, touching roofs and trees and distant fences. A chair waited near the railing, worn smooth by years of use. Beside it sat a small table, and on it, as if the day itself had arranged it, was a steaming cup of bush tea. He smiled again. Someone had been up before him. He took the cup in both hands and sat down. The heat came through the clay, gentle and grounding. He lifted it to his face first and breathed in the herbs, bitter, clean, earthy, alive. Then he drank, slowly. Below him, the world moved in simple patterns. A dog stretched in the shade. A truck rumbled faintly somewhere down the road, then faded. The leaves answered the wind with their soft, dry applause. He closed his eyes, and in that warmth, memory came, not as a sharp flash, not as pain, just as a tide. He remembered being young and full of flame, full of urgency, full of that fierce belief that music could carry medicine into the broken places of the world. He remembered the endless roads, the sleepless nights, the studios thick with smoke and concentration, the stages vibrating under his feet, the electric feeling of thousands of people breathing together. He remembered, too, the loneliness that sometimes followed applause, because even the brightest lights leave shadows behind them. And in this alternate life, this long, reimagined life, he had not escaped that truth. He had only grown gentler with it. He had learned that a man could stand before the world and still need a quiet place to rest his head. He had learned that being heard was not the same as being held. He had learned that family was not an interruption to purpose. It was the hearth of it, the real fire. He opened his eyes and looked at the hills again. What if, he thought, life had not ended where so many believed it would? What if the story had kept walking? What if the man the world froze in memory had been allowed to soften, to age, to forgive more, to be forgiven more, to sit with his children long enough for them to see him as more than a legend? What if the icon had grown into a grandfather? What if the voice of rebellion had also become the voice at the dinner table saying, "Eat some more, you too skinny"? What if history for once had allowed a gifted soul to remain ordinary in the best ways, to grow tomatoes, to misplace reading glasses, to hum melodies while making tea, to wave at neighbours, to pause in doorways, to look at the sky and say nothing at all. It was a tender thought, and the morning seemed to hold it with him. The chair creaked softly as he leaned back. A swallow darted across the yard. Somewhere beyond the hill, someone had begun to play music, very low, too far away to name the song, just a thread of rhythm carried by air. Bob listened. That had always been his way, to listen first, to let the world reveal its heartbeat before answering it. It is a strange thing, perhaps, to imagine a man like Bob Marley growing old in peace. The world often prefers its legends unfinished. It polishes them into symbols. It keeps them young forever. It pins them to posters and records and memories and says, stay there. Stay blazing, stay untouchable, stay exactly as we need you to be. But people are not made for that. People are made for mornings, for kitchens, for gardens, for family names repeated across generations, for years that leave lines around the eyes, for long forgiveness, for becoming softer without becoming smaller. And maybe that is the deeper wonder of this story, not only that he lived, but that he was allowed to keep becoming. A screen door opened behind him. He didn't turn at once. He knew the footsteps, knew the rhythm of them. Someone came out carrying another cup. The smell of coffee joined the tea in the morning air. Up early, a gentle voice said. He smiled before turning. Morning come find me, he answered. The other person smiled too and sat nearby, not too close, not too far. Nothing more needed to be said for a while. That was another thing age could teach if you let it. That love did not always need speech. Sometimes it was shared weather, shared silence, shared steam rising from cups in the morning light. They sat together as the island grew brighter. A child laughed somewhere down the hill. A gate clicked. A radio came on in a nearby house, faint and fuzzy, and then was turned down again. The day was beginning in pieces, small pieces, human pieces, and Bob felt in that quiet and old familiar gratitude. Not dramatic gratitude, not the kind that throws its arms to heaven, just a simple inner warmth for breath, for land, for one more morning, for the chance to be no longer only remembered, but present. In this imagined 2026, he had seen much. He had seen the world become faster than seemed wise. He had seen phones glow in every hand. He had seen people more connected than ever, and somehow lonelier too. He had seen his own face turned into merchandise, his songs clipped into fragments, his message simplified by strangers who wanted symbols more than substance. And yet, he had also seen young people still searching with honest hearts, still gathering in circles, still wanting truth, still crying when music found the places words could not reach, still planting gardens, still writing songs in small rooms, still asking the same old human questions. Who am I beneath the noise? What is worth loving? How do I stay kind in a world that forgets kindness? How do I live without hardening? How do I keep my soul warm? These questions never grew old. Only the clothes around them changed. He drank the last of his tea and set the cup down. The steam had thinned now. The light had strengthened. Shadows shortened on the ground below. The world was no longer half dreaming. It was awake. And still, the peace remained. Because peace was not only for dawn. That was something he had learned slowly, after years of chasing it in peaks and moments. Peace could live at noon. It could live in errands, in conversation, in folded laundry, in mending old things, in laughter after lunch, in washing fruit at the sink while someone sang off-key in the next room. Peace did not have to be perfect. It only had to be welcomed. He rose from the chair and stretched, looking once more at the hills. The day opened before him like a path through familiar trees. There would be stories in it. There would be memories. There would be songs. There would be family. There would be the strange and tender work of being alive in a world he had once nearly left too soon. And as he stepped from the veranda into the brightening day, the breeze moved through the yard again, soft as a hand across water. The island breathed. The house breathed. he breathed, and somewhere deep beneath all the years, beneath fame and history and survival and time itself, there was still that quiet pulse, the same pulse, life continuing, life continuing, life continuing. And this, perhaps, was where the real story began. Not in the spotlight, not in the myth, but here, on a hillside in morning light, with tea cooling in a cup, with birdsong in the trees, with family close by, with the sea in the distance, with an old lion still alive, still gentle, still listening. What if he had lived? What if he had lived long enough to become a sanctuary? What if the years had not taken away the fire, but taught it how to glow? The wind moved once more through the leaves, and the day, like a patient storyteller, began to answer. The day unfolded slowly, not in a rush, not in a list of things to be done, but in layers. Light first, then warmth, then sound. By mid-morning, the hillside was alive in its usual gentle way. Voices drifted up from the road below. Someone called out a greeting. A bicycle passed, its tyres whispering over the dust. The mango tree held its shade like a promise, and beneath it, a small wooden bench waited for whoever needed to rest. Bob moved through the house without hurry. He touched things as he passed. A chair back, a photo frame, the edge of a doorway. Each object carried memory, but none of it felt heavy. Time had softened the edges. What once might have pulled at the heart now simply rested there, like a quiet companion. In the kitchen, the air was warmer. The scent of cooking had begun to rise. Something simple, something familiar, the kind of food that didn't need explanation. He paused at the doorway. Inside, someone stood at the stove, stirring gently. The rhythm of it matched the rhythm of the morning. Slow, even, unforced. "Smell good," he said softly. A smile came without turning. "Always does in the morning," the voice replied. He stepped in and leaned against the counter. For a moment he just watched. The movement of the spoon, the steam rising, the sunlight falling across the table in a bright square. There was a time when mornings had been different. Airports, schedules, voices asking, waiting, pulling. There had been beauty in that life too. Energy, purpose, fire. But this was something else. This was the quiet after the storm that had never really been a storm, only a long season of movement. He reached for a piece of fruit on the table, peeled it slowly, ate it in small bites. No one rushed him. No one needed to. Outside, a child's laughter rang out again, closer this time. The sound slipped through the open window like light. It carried something simple and undeniable. Life was still growing, and that mattered. After breakfast, he stepped back outside. The sun had risen higher now. The shadows had shifted. The air held that mid-morning warmth that sits gently on the skin, not yet heavy, not yet demanding. He walked down the short path from the veranda into the yard, barefoot, always barefoot when he could. The ground felt alive beneath him, warm in some places, cool in others. Small stones pressed gently into his soles, reminding him where he was, here, always, here. He moved toward the mango tree and rested his hand against its trunk. The bark was rough, steady, unchanged. This tree had been there through many seasons, through storms and calm, through years that carried more questions than answers. He closed his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to feel the wind again, the sunlight, the slow, quiet rhythm of being. And then he heard it, a voice behind him. "Grandpa!" He turned. A small figure came running across the yard, feet quick, arms wide, hair catching the light. No hesitation, no doubt, just movement and joy. Bob laughed, that deep, warm laugh that came from somewhere older than words. He bent slightly, opening his arms just in time to catch the child as they reached him. The impact was soft but full of life. "Easy, easy," he said, still laughing. "You always say that," the child replied, breathless. "And you never listen," he answered. They both smiled. There was something about children that no amount of fame, no amount of history could prepare you for. They did not care who you had been. They only cared who you were right now. Whether you listened, whether you laughed, whether you were there. And in that way, they brought you back, always back, to something real. They sat together under the mango tree. The child talked about nothing important and everything important. A bird they had seen, a dream from the night before, a question about why the sky changes colour in the evening, a story about a friend, a complaint about something small that felt big. Bob listened, truly listened, not waiting to answer, not shaping the conversation, just listening. Because he had learned something over the years, that listening was one of the most powerful forms of love, more powerful than advice, more powerful than correction, more powerful than any words meant to fix or guide. To listen was to say, "You matter." To listen was to say, "I see you." To listen was to give someone space to become themselves. The child leaned against him as they spoke, and he placed a gentle hand on their shoulder. "Why, you always sit out here?" the child asked after a while. He looked out at the hills. "Because the world talked different out here," he said. The child tilted their head. "How?" He smiled. "Inside, people talk with words. Out here, the world talk with everything else." The child thought about this. The trees talk? Yes. The wind too? Yes. What they say. Bob paused. Not because he didn't know, but because some answers are better felt than explained. "They say, 'Slow down,'" he said finally. "They say, 'You already hear.' They say, 'Don't forget to breathe.'" The child nodded, as if this made perfect sense. Children often understand things adults have complicated. They sat there a while longer, not needing to fill the silence, not needing to move, just being. And as they sat, the world continued around them. A car passed in the distance. A neighbour waved from across the fence. A phone buzzed faintly inside the house, then stopped. Technology had found its way here too, of course. It had found its way everywhere. Small glowing screens, endless messages, news that never seemed to end. Bob had seen it all grow, had watched as the world became faster than breath, as attention became something people gave away without noticing, as silence became something rare, something people avoided, something they filled quickly with noise. He did not reject it. He understood its place. Connection could be good. Voices could travel farther than ever. Stories could reach places they never had before. But he had also learned that not everything that connects us keeps us close. Some connections stretch the spirit thin. Some noise makes it harder to hear your own heart. So he chose carefully. He used what served. He let go of what did not. And most of all, he returned, again and again, to this. To sitting under a tree with a child leaning against him, talking about birds and dreams and the colour of the sky. To moments that did not need to be shared with the world to be real. "Tell me a story," the child said suddenly. He chuckled. "What kind of story?" "A real one," they said. "From when you were young?" He looked out again. The hills seemed to lean closer. The wind slowed. The light softened just slightly, as if listening too. "All right," he said gently. And he began. "Long time ago. I was a boy not much older than you." His voice moved slowly like the morning had, not rushing, not performing, just telling. He spoke of small things, walking barefoot down dusty roads, playing music on makeshift instruments, dreaming big dreams without knowing how they would ever come true, feeling both strong and unsure at the same time. He did not tell it like a legend. He told it like a memory, because that is what it was. A life, lived step by step. Not a story carved in stone, but one that had changed shape over time. The child listened closely, eyes wide, body still. Every now and then they asked a question. "Were you scared? Did you know what would happen? Did people believe you? Bob smiled softly. Sometimes scared, he said. Never know what would happen. And some people believe, some people don't. The child nodded. And you keep going? Yes. Why? He paused again, because this was a deeper question, one that didn't need a long answer. Because the feeling inside say, don't stop, he said quietly. The child leaned closer. That feeling still there? He looked down at them, then out at the hills, then back at his own hands. Older now, slower, but still his. Yes, he said, still there. They sat with that. The breeze moved again. The leaves answered, and somewhere in the distance music drifted up once more. Slightly clearer now, a rhythm, a pulse, the kind of rhythm that lives in the body even when no one is playing. The child tapped their foot. You hear that? They asked. Bob smiled. I always hear it. They both laughed, and for a moment time felt very wide, not stretched, not heavy, just wide, as if past and present were sitting together under the same tree, sharing the same shade. He placed his hand gently over the child's small one, warm, alive, still becoming, and he felt it again, that quiet understanding, that life, no matter how far it travels, always returns to the same simple truths, to family, to presence, to listening, to love that does not need to prove itself. The sun climbed higher. The day continued to open, and in this peaceful reimagining of what could have been, the story moved forward not with noise or spectacle, but with something softer, something steadier, something that did not need to rush, because it knew it had time to grow, time to reflect, time to become. And under the mango tree, with laughter still hanging in the air, Bob Marley, older, gentler, still listening, sat at the centre of a life that had not ended too soon, but had unfolded, slowly, beautifully, one quiet moment at a time. The afternoon arrived without announcement. It did not knock. It did not hurry. It simply unfolded, like a long breath released into the open air. The sunlight grew fuller now, warmer, softer at the edges, the kind of light that rests on your shoulders instead of pressing down. Shadows stretched differently, not long like morning, not sharp like noon, just gentle shapes that moved slowly across the ground. Under the mango tree, the child had drifted away, called back toward the house by another voice, another rhythm of the day. Bob remained, for a little while longer. He leaned back on the bench, his hands resting loosely on his knees. The quiet had returned, but it was not empty. It never was. There is a difference between silence and absence. Silence is full. Silence carries breath, memory, wind, distant sound, the hum beneath everything. And he had always trusted silence, perhaps more than noise. He watched as a single leaf detached itself from a branch above and drifted down in slow, patient circles. It did not rush toward the ground. It seemed to enjoy the journey. He followed it with his eyes until it landed softly near his foot. He smiled. Even the leaf knows how to take its time, he murmured. And for a moment, he stayed there, feeling that truth settle inside him again. Take your time. The world had not always moved this way. He remembered a different rhythm, faster, urgent, filled with expectation. There had been years when every hour felt claimed by something, a place to be, a song to finish, a message to carry, a stage waiting, a crowd expecting. And he had given himself fully to that life, because it mattered, because music had been more than sound. It had been voice, it had been medicine, it had been resistance and love woven together in rhythm and melody. But even then, even in those years of motion, there had always been moments like this. Small pauses, breaths between songs, spaces where something deeper could rise. He stood slowly, stretching his arms above his head, letting the sun warm his face. Then he began to walk, not toward anything in particular, just walking. down the gentle slope beyond the yard where the grass grew taller and softer, where the path became less defined, where the land felt more like itself and less like something shaped. Each step was unhurried. He listened as he walked, the sound of his feet brushing the grass, the distant rhythm of waves far beyond the hills, the faint echo of voices carried on the wind, and then something else, a melody, very soft at first, almost hidden. But there, he stopped, tilted his head slightly, listened again. Yes, it was coming from farther down the slope, near a cluster of trees that marked the edge of a small clearing. A guitar, played gently, not perfectly, but honestly. He smiled. That sound, that searching, unfinished sound. He knew it well. He moved toward it, slowly so as not to disturb it. As he approached, the melody became clearer. A simple progression, repeated, tried again, adjusted slightly, played once more. Under the trees sat a young man, maybe in his late teens, a guitar resting against his knee, fingers pressing the strings carefully, as if asking permission from each note before letting it ring out. The young man didn't notice him at first. He was lost in it, in the trying, in the feeling. Bob paused a few steps away. He did not interrupt. He remembered this space, this quiet, private place where music is not yet something to be shared with the world, but something you are still discovering for yourself. It is a fragile space, and it deserves respect. So he listened. The young man played the same sequence again, this time a little more confident, the rhythm steadier, the notes clearer. Then he stopped, exhaled, shook his head slightly. Almost, he whispered to himself. Bob chuckled softly. Almost is a good place to be, he said. The young man looked up, startled for a moment, then relaxed when he recognized him. Oh, I didn't see you, he said. That all right, Bob replied, stepping closer. Music make people forget everything else. The young man smiled, a little shy. I've been trying to get this right, he said, tapping the strings lightly. Bob nodded. What are you trying to say with it? The young man hesitated. I don't know yet, he admitted, just something. Bob sat down on a low rock nearby. That the best kind of start, he said gently. They sat in a shared quiet for a moment. Then Bob gestured toward the guitar. Play it again, he said. The young man adjusted his grip and began once more. The melody came out slowly, careful, searching, not perfect, but real. Bob closed his eyes as he listened. He wasn't listening for technique, not for precision. He was listening for feeling, for intention, for that subtle thread that runs through all true music, the part that cannot be taught, only felt. When the young man finished, he looked up again. What do you think? Bob opened his eyes. It not finished yet, he said softly. The young man laughed. I know that. Bob smiled. But it alive, he added. The young man's expression shifted. Alive? Yes, Bob said. You can hear when something just sound, and when something breathing. The young man looked down at the guitar. I want it to mean something, he said quietly. Bob leaned forward slightly. It already means something, he replied. You just don't know the words for it yet. The breeze moved through the trees, brushing the leaves together in a soft, constant whisper. Music, not about finding something perfect, Bob continued. It's about finding something true. The young man nodded slowly. How do you know when it's true? He asked. Bob paused. Then he placed his hand gently over his chest. You feel it here, he said, and if you listen close enough, you don't need nobody else to tell you. The young man sat very still, holding that, trying to understand it. Bob watched him with a quiet warmth. He had seen this moment many times, not always with music, sometimes with words, sometimes with art, sometimes with life itself. That moment where someone stands on the edge of becoming something they cannot yet name, and the only thing they need is a little space and a little trust. Play it again, Bob said softly. The young man nodded, and this time he played differently, not trying to fix it, not trying to impress, just playing. Letting the notes come as they were, and something shifted, subtle but real. The melody breathed a little more. The pauses felt intentional, the sound settled. Bob smiled. "There," he said quietly. The young man stopped, looking up. "What changed?" "You stopped trying to make it something," Bob said, "and you let it be what it is." The young man exhaled slowly. "I think I felt that," he said. Bob nodded. "At the beginning." They sat there a while longer, talking a little, playing a little, sitting in silence between, the kind of time that does not feel like passing but like deepening. Eventually the young man stood. "I should go," he said. "They'll be wondering where I am." Bob nodded. "They always do," he said with a soft smile. The young man hesitated for a moment. "Thank you," he said. Bob shook his head gently. "No need," he replied. "Just keep listening." The young man smiled, then turned and walked back toward the path, guitar slung over his shoulder. Bob watched him go, not with nostalgia, not with longing, but with something quieter, a recognition that life continues through moments like that, through passing something unseen from one person to another, not a lesson, not a rule, just a feeling, a way of being. When the young man disappeared beyond the trees, Bob remained seated. The clearing was still again, but the air felt different, as if the music had left something behind. He closed his eyes once more, and in the stillness he could almost hear it. That same melody. Not from the guitar now, but from somewhere deeper. The song of becoming. It never really stops. It changes shape. It moves through different hands, different voices, different generations, but it remains steady, patient, waiting for each person to find their part in it. The sun began its slow descent. Not yet evening, but no longer early. That in-between time, where the day softens, where the edges blur, where reflection begins to rise gently without asking. Bob stood again and began to walk back up the hill, each step slow, each breath easy. Behind him, the clearing returned to silence, but the music remained, in the air, in the memory, in the quiet understanding that something meaningful had passed between two people without needing to be named. As he reached the yard again, the house came into view, familiar, steady, waiting, and from inside, faintly, he could hear voices again, laughter, movement, life continuing. He paused at the edge of the yard and looked once more at the horizon. The sky had shifted slightly, a deeper blue now, with the promise of something softer to come. Evening would arrive, then night, then another morning. And through it all, the same gentle truth remained. You don't have to rush. You don't have to become everything at once. You don't have to know the whole song to begin playing. Sometimes it is enough to sit under a tree, to listen, to try, to feel something small come alive in your hands, and to trust that it will grow, in its own time, in its own way. He stepped back toward the house. The screen door creaked softly as he opened it, and the day, still unfolding, welcomed him inside. Section 4. The late afternoon settled gently over the house, not with a sudden change, but with a soft shift in feeling. The light grew warmer now, golden. It stretched across the yard and climbed the walls of the house, resting in quiet corners and along the edges of windows. The air cooled just enough to be noticed, like a hand brushing lightly across the skin. Inside, the house held a different kind of rhythm. More voices now, more movement. The sound of plates being set, chairs shifting, someone humming in another room, not loudly, just enough to fill the space between sounds. Bob stepped inside and paused. He did not go straight in. He stood for a moment at the threshold, watching. There is something sacred about watching life without entering it right away, seeing it as it is, unchanged by your presence. At the table, two children were arguing softly over something small, a piece of fruit maybe, or who would sit where, the kind of argument that rises quickly and fades just as quickly. In the kitchen, someone stirred a pot slowly, the wooden spoon tracing circles that had likely been traced 1,000 times before. Near the window, another family member sat with a phone in hand, scrolling, then stopping, then looking up as if remembering something more important than the screen. It was also ordinary, and because of that, it was beautiful. Bob moved in quietly. "Careful," he said with a smile, placing a gentle hand on one of the children's shoulders. "Plenty for everyone." The argument softened. It always did. Not because he demanded it, but because his presence carried a certain calm, not loud, not heavy, just steady. The kind of calm that reminds others they don't need to hold on so tightly. He took a seat at the table, not at the head, never at the head, just among them. The chairs filled slowly, voices overlapped, laughter came and went in small waves. Someone told a story. Another interrupted halfway through. A third corrected the details, and somewhere in the middle of it all a quiet understanding held everything together. This is home, not perfect, not always smooth, but real. Bob leaned back slightly in his chair, listening. Again, always listening. There was a time when he had searched for meaning in big places, in crowds, in movements, in the wide echo of his voice reaching beyond him. And that had been true too. Meaning had lived there. But here it was smaller, closer. It lived in the way someone passed a plate without being asked, in the way a hand rested briefly on another shoulder, in the way laughter lingered just a second longer than necessary. Meaning did not always arrive with power. Sometimes it arrived with quiet. "Remember when?" someone began. And just like that, memory entered the room. It came lightly at first, a story from years ago, something small, but as it unfolded others joined in, adding pieces, correcting details, laughing at parts that had grown softer with time. Bob smiled. He remembered that day. Not perfectly. Memory never holds everything. But the feeling remained, the warmth, the closeness, the sense that even then, in moments that seemed ordinary, something lasting was being built. That is how family works, not through grand declarations, but through repeated small moments that slowly become something strong enough to hold many years. A child climbed onto the chair beside him, leaning gently against his arm. Without looking down, he rested his hand over theirs. A simple gesture, but full. They stayed like that for a while. The conversation moved around them, flowing, changing, returning. At some point, the phone near the window buzzed again, this time louder, more persistent. The person holding it sighed slightly, then answered. A voice came through, faint but sharp. Something about work, something about urgency, something that did not belong in this room, but had found its way in anyway. Bob watched quietly. He did not judge. The world outside this house had its own pace, its own demands, its own noise. And people carried that with them, even into places meant for rest. But he had learned something over time. You cannot always control what enters your space, but you can choose how deeply it settles. The conversation at the table continued, though a little softer now. A slight shift, a small ripple. Then, slowly, it returned to its rhythm. Because the truth is, peace does not mean silence forever. It means knowing how to return to calm after interruption. The call ended, the phone was set down, and the person looked up, as if remembering where they were. Bob met their eyes, not with instruction, not with correction, just with a quiet presence. They smiled, a small, grateful smile, and just like that, they were back. Back at the table, back in the moment, back with the people who mattered. The sun dipped lower, the golden light deepened. It filled the room now, touching faces, softening edges, wrapping everything in a warm glow that felt almost like memory itself. Bob leaned forward slightly. "Sing something," one of the children said suddenly. He laughed softly. "Always want music," he said. "Yes," they replied simply. He looked around the table, at the faces, at the light, at the small, breathing world gathered there. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. He didn't stand. He did not perform. He simply began, softly, almost like speaking, a melody, slow, familiar, but different. Not the same voice the world had once known, older now, softer, carrying more space between the notes, but still true, always true. The room quieted, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. The song moved gently through the air, not trying to impress, not trying to reach beyond the walls, just filling the space it was in. And something happened, as it always does when music is real. Time softened, the edges of the day blurred, the small worries of earlier hours faded slightly, not gone, but quieter, less sharp, more distant. The child beside him leaned closer. Another voice joined in, quietly, then another. Not perfectly, but together. And that was enough, because music, at its heart, was never about perfection. It was about connection, about sharing breath, about letting something inside you meet something inside someone else, without force, without explanation, just meeting. When the song ended, no one spoke right away. They didn't need to. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something gentle, something held. Bob exhaled slowly, and in that exhale there was a quiet understanding that this was why he had lived. Not only for the stages, not only for the message, but for this. For a room filled with people who knew him not as a symbol, but as a man, a father, a grandfather, a presence, someone who sat at the table, who laughed, who listened, who sang not to be heard by the world, but to be felt by those close enough to share the moment. The light continued to fade. The golden tones softened into amber, then into something deeper. Outside, the sky began its slow transformation. Hints of orange, touches of pink, a quiet shift toward evening. Inside, the table slowly emptied. Plates were cleared. Chairs moved back. The rhythm changed again, from gathering to settling. Bob stood and stepped back onto the veranda. The air was cooler now. The breeze carried a different tone, softer, slower, like the day itself was preparing to rest. He leaned against the railing, looked out at the horizon. The sun hovered low, almost touching the edge of the world, and in that moment everything felt suspended, not ending, not beginning, just being. He took a slow breath, and then another, and in that quiet he felt it again, that same steady pulse, life continuing, not in a rush, not in a line, but in cycles, in returns, in soft transitions from one moment to the next. The world had changed so much, faster, louder, more connected, more distracted. But here, on this hillside, in this house, with this family, there was still space, still time, still something unbroken. And as the sun slipped gently below the horizon, leaving behind a sky painted in soft fading light, Bob Marley stood in the quiet of evening, not as a legend, not as a voice carried across decades, but as a man who had lived long enough to understand that the most powerful things in life are often the quietest ones, a shared meal, a soft song, a hand resting on another, a moment that asks nothing but gives everything. The sky dimmed. The first stars began to appear, and the night, patient and kind, began to arrive. Night did not arrive all at once. It never does. It comes slowly, like a curtain being drawn across the sky, one gentle inch at a time. The colours faded first, gold into amber, amber into rose, rose into a deep, quiet blue. And then the blue deepened further, until it became something softer, darker, more restful. On the hillside, the air cooled. The breeze changed its tone. It no longer carried the warmth of the day. Now it felt lighter, calmer, as if the world itself had decided to speak more quietly. Bob remained on the veranda as the last of the light disappeared. He did not rush inside. Evening was something to be experienced, not passed through. He leaned gently on the railing, his fingers resting against the worn wood. The surface was smooth in places, rough in others, like time itself, marked but still strong. In the distance the sea had darkened, no longer silver, now a deep endless shade reflecting only hints of the sky above it. The first star appeared, small, steady, then another and another. One by one, without urgency, the sky revealed its quiet companions. Bob watched them. There was a time when he had not looked up so often, too busy, too focused on what was ahead. But age had changed that, or perhaps softened it. He had learned that looking up was not a distraction. It was a reminder of how small you are and how held you are at the same time. A door opened behind him. Soft footsteps followed. "You still out here?" a familiar voice said. He smiled without turning. "Night just getting started," he replied. The other person stepped beside him, holding 2 cups. One was passed into his hand, warm, comforting. He nodded in thanks. They stood side by side, not speaking for a while, just watching, just breathing, the kind of silence that does not need to be filled, because it is already full. After a moment, the voice spoke again. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Bob let the question settle. He took a slow sip from the cup, felt the warmth move through him, then he exhaled gently. "Sometimes," he said. The voice beside him continued. "I mean, everything. The music, the life, the years. It could have gone another way." Bob nodded slightly. "Yes," he said. A pause. "Do you wish anything different?" the voice asked. He looked out at the stars. They had multiplied now. The sky no longer empty, now full of quiet light. He thought for a moment. Not searching, just allowing the answer to come. Then he shook his head gently. "No," he said. Another pause. "Nothing?" the voice asked, a little surprised. Bob smiled softly. "Life don't give you the story you imagine," he said. "It give you the one you live." The breeze moved again, carrying the scent of night flowers now, a deeper scent, softer, almost hidden. "But you lived more than most," the voice said. Bob chuckled quietly. "Everybody live," he replied, "just not everybody notice." They both smiled at that. And for a while they stood there, letting the night settle around them. From somewhere down the hill music began again, different this time. A radio perhaps, soft, distant, carried on the breeze like a memory you can't quite place. Bob listened, always listening, even now, even after all these years. Music had never left him. Not really. It had only changed its role. Once, it had been his voice to the world. Now, it was something else. A companion. A reflection. A way of understanding things that words alone could not hold. "You don't play as much these days," the voice beside him said gently. Bob nodded. "Not like before," he admitted. "Why?" He thought about that. Not long, but carefully. "Because music changed for me," he said. "Before, it was something I had to give. And now?" He paused. "Now it's something I sit with." The other person nodded slowly. Understanding. Or at least, beginning to. "You still feel it the same way?" they asked. Bob smiled. "No," he said. "Deeper." The word hung in the air for a moment. Deeper. Not louder. Not bigger. Just deeper. Like water that runs beneath the surface. Like roots that grow unseen. Like understanding that does not need to explain itself. They drank their tea slowly. The warmth matched the coolness of the night perfectly. Balanced. Gentle. Complete. After a while, Bob stepped away from the railing and walked down the steps into the yard. The grass felt different now. Cooler. Softer. The kind of softness that only comes at night, when the heaters left and the earth can breathe again. He looked up. The stars had fully arrived, hundreds of them, quiet, patient, unbothered by anything below. He lay down on the grass, slowly, carefully, and folded his hands over his chest. The sky stretched above him, endless and still. The breeze moved lightly across his face, and for a moment, everything else faded, not disappeared, just softened. The house behind him, the voices inside, the world beyond the hill, all of it remained. But here, in this space between breaths, there was something else, something deeper, something that had always been there, waiting. He closed his eyes and listened, not to sound, but to presence, to the quiet awareness that sits beneath everything else. The same awareness he had felt as a young man, the same awareness that had guided him through music, through life, through choices both clear and uncertain. It had never left. It had only become easier to hear. "You ever think about why we hear?" the voice from the veranda called gently. Bob opened his eyes, did not sit up, just looked at the stars again. "All the time," he answered. "And?" the voice asked. He smiled. "I think we hear to feel," he said. The voice waited. "To feel?" they repeated. "Yes," he said. "To feel love, to feel joy, to feel pain, to feel everything, and still choose to stay open." The night held his words, softly, without echo. "And if someone don't know how?" the voice asked. Bob took a slow breath, then let it go. "Then they learn," he said quietly. "Or they forget, and remember again later." The breeze shifted, a little stronger now, then softer again, like breath, like time, like everything that moves without forcing itself. He remained on the grass, looking up, feeling small, feeling connected, feeling at peace. There had been years when peace felt like something to chase, something just out of reach, something that lived somewhere else, in another place, another time, another version of life. But now, he understood. Peace was not somewhere else. It was here, always here, in the way you sat, in the way you listened, in the way you allowed the moment to be enough. He closed his eyes again, and this time sleep brushed lightly at the edges of his awareness, not pulling, just offering. The house behind him grew quieter. Voices faded, lights dimmed, the world settled, and under the wide, endless sky, with the soft earth beneath him and the slow rhythm of night all around, Bob Marley rested, not as a man who had escaped life, but as one who had stayed, who had lived, who had listened, who had softened, who had allowed time to carry him not away from himself, but deeper into it. The stars continued their quiet watch. The breeze continued its gentle movement, and somewhere, far beyond what could be seen or named, the same steady pulse remained. Life continuing, life continuing, life continuing, and in that quiet continuation, there was rest. Morning returned the way it always does, softly, without asking permission, without needing attention, just light, slowly touching the edges of things. The sky began to pale again, shifting from deep night into that gentle early blue that feels like a quiet promise. The stars faded one by one, not disappearing all at once, but slipping away as if they trusted the sun to carry the day forward. On the hillside, the air was cool, cooler than the day before, cooler than memory expected, the kind of cool that wakes the skin slowly, like a whisper rather than a call. Bob opened his eyes. He had not gone back inside. Sometime in the night, he had drifted into sleep beneath the sky, wrapped not in blankets, but in the soft rhythm of the earth itself. Now, as the first light touched his face, he stirred, not with discomfort, but with awareness. The ground beneath him was still. The grass held a trace of dew. The breeze moved lightly across his arms, carrying the scent of morning once more. He blinked slowly, looked up. The sky was different now, empty of stars, full of possibility. He smiled. Another one, he whispered. Another day. Another chance to be here. He sat up carefully, brushing the grass from his hands. His body felt the night, just a little stiffness, a quiet reminder that rest does not always mean softness, but it always means something. He stood, stretched, and listened. The world was waking again. Birds first, always the birds. Then distant movement. Then the soft beginning of voices. And somewhere faintly, the low hum of electricity. Modern life stretching itself awake. He walked slowly back toward the house. The veranda still held the quiet of night, but the door was slightly open now. Inside, he could hear the early movements of someone already beginning the day. He stepped in. The floorboards greeted him again. Familiar, steady, alive in their own quiet way. In the kitchen, a kettle was just beginning to whisper. Not yet boiling, just close. He moved to the sink and splashed cool water on his face. The sensation was immediate, sharp but refreshing, a clean beginning. He looked at his reflection in the small mirror above. Not for long, just enough. The face looking back at him carried years now, lines that told stories, eyes that had seen much and learned to soften what they held. He did not search for youth there. He did not wish for it. There is a quiet peace that comes when you stop asking your face to be something it has already moved beyond. He dried his hands slowly, turned, and stepped back into the morning. The tea was ready. It always found its way to him, as if the day itself knew what he needed. He took the cup and stepped outside once more. The hillside was alive again, but gently. Always gently here. The light spread slowly across the land, revealing shapes that had been hidden in the night. The mango tree stood steady. The path beyond it curved the same way it always had. The distant sea caught the early sun and shimmered softly. He sat. Same chair, same place, different day. And that was enough. Because repetition, he had learned, is not emptiness. It is grounding. It is the rhythm that allows life to feel steady even as everything changes. He sipped the tea, warm, bitter, real. From somewhere behind him, a voice called out, "Morning." He turned slightly. "Morning," he replied. A few more voices followed. Light greetings, small acknowledgements. Nothing heavy, nothing that demanded more than the moment could give. And in that simplicity, there was something healing. The world did not always need big conversations. Sometimes it needed small recognitions. "I see you. You're here. We're still here." A child ran past the veranda, not stopping this time, just passing through. Energy moving forward, life continuing. Bob watched them go, and something in him felt both still and moving at once. There is a strange feeling that comes with age, a feeling of being both rooted and passing, of being present in the moment, but also aware that the moment will not stay. It is not sadness, not exactly. It is something quieter, a kind of acceptance, that everything flows, that nothing holds forever, and that this is what gives it meaning. He leaned back slightly, closed his eyes for just a moment, and listened again. The world had grown louder than it used to be, even here, even in this place that held so much quiet. Somewhere, a phone began to play a notification tone. Somewhere else, a car engine started sooner than it needed to. The hum of connection, of messages, of constant movement. It reached even the edges of this hillside, but it did not overwhelm it. Not here, because here, the deeper rhythm still held. The rhythm of breath, of wind, of life unfolding without needing to be pushed. He opened his eyes again, and this time he noticed something new, a small device resting on the table beside him, not his, left there by someone else. A phone. The screen lit up suddenly, bright, alive, pulling attention. He looked at it, did not reach for it, just observed. A message appeared, then another, then something else. Information. Always information. The world speaking all at once, all the time. He had learned to be careful with that, not fearful, just aware, because too much noise, even beautiful noise, can drown out something important. Your own voice, your own feeling, your own knowing. He reached out slowly, picked up the device, held it in his hand. It felt light, but it carried weight, not physical weight. Something else. The weight of everything it connected to, everything it carried, everything it asked of you without saying a word. He looked at the screen for a moment longer, then gently placed it back down, face down this time, and smiled. Not now, he said quietly, because there is power in choosing when to listen, power in choosing when to engage, power in knowing that not everything needs your attention immediately. He lifted his cup again, drank, and let the moment return to itself. The breeze moved, the leaves answered, the sunlight warmed his skin, and for a while, everything was exactly as it needed to be. After some time, he stood, not because he had somewhere to go, but because the day had opened enough to invite movement. He walked down the path again, past the mango tree, past the place where the young man had sat the day before. The clearing was empty now, but the feeling remained, that quiet sense of something growing. He paused there briefly, then continued, farther this time, down toward the lower part of the hillside where fewer people walked, where the grass grew a little taller, where the land felt less touched. As he walked, he thought, not in words, not in sentences, just in impressions, about time, about how it had moved, how it had once felt like something to chase, then something to hold on to, and now, something to move with, like water. You cannot stop it, you cannot store it forever, but you can learn to flow with it, to move when it moves, to rest when it rests, to trust that it carries you somewhere meaningful, even when you do not see the path ahead. He reached a small rise in the land and stopped. From here, the view opened wider. The sea stretched farther. The sky felt larger. The world more expansive. He took a deep breath. Then another. And in that moment, standing between what had been and what was still unfolding, he felt something settle inside him again. Not a thought, not a realization, just a quiet knowing. That life does not need to be understood completely to be lived fully. That meaning is not something you arrive at once. It is something you touch, again and again, in small moments, like this one, standing in the morning light, breathing, listening, being. The breeze moved once more, and with it, the faint sound of music drifted up again from somewhere unseen, different from yesterday, but familiar in its feeling. Always that same thread, the same pulse, the same quiet invitation. Keep going, keep feeling, keep listening. Bob smiled and began to walk again, slowly, steadily, into the day that waited, not ahead of him, but all around him. The day moved gently into its middle hours, not hurried, not heavy, just steady. The sun climbed higher, but it did not press down harshly. A thin veil of cloud passed slowly overhead, softening the light, turning it into something diffused and kind. The hillside held that quiet balance between warmth and ease, where nothing feels rushed and nothing feels still. Bob walked without destination. That had become a kind of practice for him. To walk not towards something, but within something, within the day, within the moment, within himself. The path beneath his feet curved naturally, shaped by years of quiet footsteps. Grass leaned slightly where others had passed before him. Small stones shifted gently under his weight, each step grounding him more deeply into the land. He passed a fence line where vines had begun to curl and claim their space again. Nature had its own way of returning, of softening edges, of reminding everything that stillness and growth can live side by side. A breeze moved through, carrying something new, a faint scent of rain, not present yet, but coming. He paused, lifted his face slightly, closed his eyes, and breathed in. Yes, rain would come later. Not a storm, just a soft rain, the kind that does not interrupt the day, but completes it. He smiled. There you are, he murmured. There is a quiet joy in noticing small things before they arrive. It makes the world feel more alive, more connected, like you are part of something that moves with you, not around you. He continued walking until he reached a small structure at the edge of the lower hillside. It was simple, wooden, a little weathered, but cared for, a small music space, not a studio like before, not filled with equipment or expectation, just a room, a few instruments, a place to sit, to listen, to let something come if it wished to. He stepped inside. The air was cooler here, still, the kind of stillness that holds sound gently, like a bowl holds water. A guitar rested in the corner, a small drum near the wall, a worn chair by the window. Nothing arranged for display, everything placed for use. He moved to the chair and sat down. For a moment, he did nothing, just sat, letting the space recognize him again, letting himself arrive fully. Then, slowly, he reached for the guitar, not with urgency, not with intention, just with curiosity. His fingers found the strings, familiar, always familiar, even now, even after all these years. He did not begin with a song. He began with a single note, soft, held, letting it ring. Then another, and another, not forming anything yet, just listening to the sound itself, to how it moved in the air, to how it settled, to how it faded. Music, he had learned, is not only in the notes, it is in the space between them, the silence, the pause, the breath. He closed his eyes and played, slowly, not performing, not creating for anyone, just allowing. The melody that came was simple, unfinished, but it did not need to be complete. It was enough that it was real. As he played, something shifted, not outside, inside, a memory, not sharp, not demanding, just present. He saw himself younger, standing in a room not so different from this one, a guitar in his hands, a world in front of him that felt both possible and uncertain, that same feeling, that same quiet question. What will this become? He smiled softly. Some questions are never meant to be fully answered. They are meant to be lived. The melody changed slightly. A new note entered, then another, and slowly something began to take shape. Not forced, not constructed, just forming. He opened his eyes and looked at his hands, older now, slower, but still capable, still connected, still listening. That was the important part. Not speed, not perfection, listening. He played for a while. He did not measure the time. There was no need. Outside, the breeze shifted again. The scent of rain grew closer. And then, the first drop, soft, barely audible, a small tap against the roof, then another, then another. The rain had arrived, just as he had felt it would. It came gently, no thunder, no rush, just a steady, soft rhythm, like fingers tapping lightly on a drum. He paused his playing, listened. Rain has its own music, always has, and it asks for nothing. It simply falls, steady, patient, present. He set the guitar down, stood, and walked to the doorway. The rain was visible now, fine lines falling from the sky, catching the light in soft flashes before disappearing into the earth. The hillside changed under the rain. The colours deepened, the air cooled, the world softened. He stepped just outside the doorway, let a few drops touch his skin. Cool, refreshing, alive. He did not move back inside. He stayed there, feeling it, listening. There is something about rain that invites reflection, not heavy reflection, not the kind that pulls you inward too sharply, but a gentle kind, the kind that asks, "Where have you been? And where are you now?" He leaned lightly against the doorway. watched as the rain moved across the land, and thought, not in words, but in feeling, about everything that had passed, about everything that had stayed, about how life had unfolded in ways he could never have planned, and how, somehow, it had led him here, to this moment, this quiet, this breath. The rain continued, soft, consistent, unbothered, and in that steady rhythm he felt something settle again. Not a conclusion, not an answer, just a calm, a sense that nothing needed to be rushed, nothing needed to be forced. Everything would unfold in its time, just like this rain. He stepped back inside after a while, picked up the guitar again, and this time, when he played, the melody had changed, not dramatically, but enough. It carried something new now, something shaped by the rain, by the stillness, by the quiet understanding that had moved through him. He played it slowly, letting each note rest fully before moving to the next, and for a moment it felt complete, not perfect, not final, but whole. He nodded slightly. "That enough," he said softly. Because sometimes enough is exactly what something is meant to be. He set the guitar down again, and sat in the quiet as the rain continued outside. The world had softened, the edges blurred, the rhythm slowed, and inside that small wooden room, with the sound of rain and the echo of a melody still hanging in the air, Bob Marley sat in a place he had once searched for, and now simply lived within. A place where music was no longer something to chase, but something to meet. A place where life did not need to prove itself, but only to be felt. The rain fell, the day continued, and somewhere, beneath it all, the same quiet pulse remained, steady, unbroken, alive. The rain did not stay long. It rarely does when it comes like that, soft, intentional, almost thoughtful. It passed the way a quiet conversation passes, gently, without interruption, leaving something behind. The earth held the memory of it, the grass darker now, the air cooler, the scent deeper. Bob stepped outside once more as the final drop slowed, then stopped. The sky had opened again, not fully clear, but wide. Clouds drifting slowly, like thoughts that no longer needed to be held tightly. He walked out into the yard. The ground was damp beneath his feet, cool, alive. There is something about walking after rain that feels different, as if the world has exhaled, as if something has been released. He moved slowly, letting his feet sink slightly into the softened earth, leaving faint impressions that would fade by morning. Nothing permanent, just a trace. That was something he had come to understand deeply, that most of what we leave behind is not meant to last forever. Not the footprints, not the words, not even the songs. What remains differently, in feeling, in memory, in quiet influence that moves through others long after you're gone. He paused near the mango tree again. A drop of water fell from a leaf above, landing softly on his shoulder. He smiled. "Still falling," he murmured. Some things continue even after they seem finished. The tree held many small droplets, each one catching light in its own way, tiny reflections of the sky, tiny mirrors of something much larger. He reached up and touched one gently. It slipped away at once, gone, and yet not gone, just changed, returned. Everything returns, in one form or another. He sat beneath the tree again, the bench still cool from the rain, and for a moment he did nothing, no movement, no thought, just presence. The house behind him was quieter now. Afternoon had softened into that slow reflective part of the day where energy dips and everything feels just a little more inward. Somewhere inside, a low voice spoke. Another answered. Then silence again. Rest. He closed his eyes, and this time memory came more clearly. Not of youth, not of stages, but of something else. Years, the middle years, the ones people do not speak about as much. The years of building, of holding things together, of navigating change, of learning that love is not only feeling, but effort. He remembered long conversations at night, not always easy, not always resolved, but necessary. He remembered moments of distance, of misunderstanding, of trying to hold on to something that felt like it was slipping. He remembered the quiet work of returning, again and again. Because love, he had learned, is not something that stays simply because it began. It stays because it is chosen, repeatedly, in small ways, in quiet ways, in moments no one else sees. He opened his eyes slowly. The sky above the tree had shifted again. More blue now, less cloud. The world always moving, always changing, and yet somehow always itself. A figure appeared at the edge of the yard, walking slowly toward him. Not a child this time, someone older, closer to his own age. They carried something in their hands, a small box, wooden, worn at the edges. Bob watched them approach, did not stand, just waited. They reached him and smiled. "I found this," they said softly. He looked at the box, then back at them. "Where?" he asked. "In the back room, under some things," he nodded. "Been a while," he said. They sat beside him and placed the box between them. For a moment neither of them opened it. There was no rush. Some things ask for a slower pace. Finally the lid was lifted. Inside, papers, old photographs, small objects, pieces of a life. Bob leaned forward slightly, reached in, picked up a photograph. He looked at it for a long moment. The image showed a younger version of himself, surrounded by people, laughter frozen in time, a moment captured that no longer existed, and yet somehow still did. He smiled. "Long time," he said quietly. The other person nodded. "Feels like another life," they replied. Bob shook his head gently. "Same life," he said, "just different part." They sat with that. He moved through the contents slowly, not searching for anything specific, just allowing each piece to meet him again. A note, folded carefully, worn at the edges. He opened it, read it silently. The words were simple, but full. He folded it again, placed it back. There are some things you do not need to read out loud. Some things are meant to live quietly within you. The other person picked up an object, a small bracelet, handmade. "This was always your favourite," they said. He nodded. "Taught me something," he replied. "What?" they asked. He held the bracelet gently. "That what's simple can still carry meaning," he said. They both smiled, because it was true. The world had become complicated in many ways. More choices, more noise, more layers, but meaning often stayed simple. A shared meal, a quiet word, a small object passed from one hand to another, a moment remembered. He placed the bracelet back in the box, closed the lid gently. They sat there for a while, not speaking, just holding the presence of what had been, not with regret, not with longing, just with acknowledgement. That life had been full, that it had held many seasons, and that each one had shaped the person sitting here now. "You ever think about what stays?" the other person asked quietly. Bob looked out at the hillside. The light had softened again. Late afternoon returning. He took a slow breath, then answered. "Not everything," he said. "Just what matter." They waited. "What matter?" they asked. He smiled. "Love," he said simply. "Kindness. Moments people carry with them when you're not there." The breeze moved again, soft, consistent. "And everything else?" they asked. Bob shrugged lightly. "It fade," he said, "and that all right. Because not everything is meant to last. Some things are meant to pass through you, to shape you, to teach you, and then to go, leaving behind only what is needed." They both stood slowly, the box still between them. "I'll put it back," the other person said. Bob nodded. "Good place for it," he replied. They walked back toward the house together, slow, unhurried. The kind of walk that does not measure distance, only presence. At the door they paused. "Thank you," the other person said. Bob looked at them gently. "For what?" he asked. For staying, they said. He held that for a moment, then smiled. Always was the plan, he said softly. They stepped inside. The light shifted again. Evening approaching once more. Another cycle. Another return. And as the day moved toward its quiet close, Bob felt it again. That same calm. That same steady presence. That same understanding that had grown deeper with each passing year. That life is not something you hold on to, but something you move through. Gently. Fully. With open hands. The sky outside began to change. Colours returning. Fading. Becoming something soft again. And inside the house, the quiet continued to gather. Not empty. Never empty. Just full in a different way. Full of memory. Full of presence. Full of something that did not need to be named. To be known. Evening returned like a familiar song. Not new, not surprising, but always welcome. The sky softened once again, easing itself out of the brightness of day and into something more reflective. The colours moved slowly, gold to amber, amber to rose, rose to that deep, quiet blue that seemed to hold the whole world in a gentle pause. Inside the house, the lights came on one by one, not harsh, not bright, just enough. Warm pools of light in each room, like small suns placed carefully where they were needed. Bob moved through the space slowly, not because he had to, but because he wanted to feel it. The evening had its own rhythm, different from morning, different from afternoon. It did not invite movement. It invited settling. He passed through the living room. A soft conversation lingered there, quiet laughter rising and falling like breath. A chair creaked gently as someone leaned back. A cup was set down with a soft clink. These sounds, they were part of the music now, not instruments, not melodies, but life, expressed in small ways. He paused near the doorway, watched for a moment, then moved on. The hallway held a different kind of quiet, more still, more inward. The kind of quiet that feels like it is holding something gently without needing to reveal it. At the end of the hall, a small room waited. The door was slightly open. Inside, a lamp cast a soft golden light across a desk, a chair, and a shelf filled with books and old papers. Bob stepped in, closed the door behind him, not fully, just enough. He sat at the desk. For a while, he did nothing. Just rested his hands on the surface. Felt the grain of the wood beneath his fingertips, listened to the quiet. Then he reached for a notebook, simple, worn, pages filled with handwriting that shifted over time, some lines steady, others softer, some fading slightly with age. He opened it, turned a few pages, stopped, read. Not everything, just a piece, a line, then another, words he'd written years ago, thoughts that had come and gone, ideas that had once felt urgent, now resting quietly on the page. He smiled. It is a strange thing to meet your past self in writing, to see what you thought you knew, what you questioned, what you held tightly, and what you eventually learned to release. He picked up a pen, held it loosely, not writing yet, just holding, the way you hold something before you decide whether it needs to be used. The world outside continued its slow dimming. Voices softened. Footsteps grew fewer. The house began to settle into night. He looked at the page again, and this time he began to write, slowly. No rush, no pressure, just words, simple words, the kind that come when you're no longer trying to say something important, but something true. He wrote about the day, not everything, just pieces, the morning light, the child's laughter, the young man with the guitar, the rain, the box, small things, but real. He paused after a few lines, looked at what he'd written, then added something else, a thought, quiet, almost like a whisper on the page. Life is not what we build to last, but what we give that continues. He set the pen down, let the words sit there, did not add more, because sometimes a single line is enough. He closed the notebook gently. Not finished, just paused. He leaned back in the chair, looked around the room, the books, the papers, the small objects that had gathered over time, each one a piece of something, a moment, a memory, a meaning, but none of them held him, not anymore. He had learned something over the years, that you can honour what has been without living inside it. That memory is a place you visit, not a place you stay. He stood slowly, moved to the window, opened it slightly. The night air came in at once, cool, fresh, carrying the quiet hum of the world outside. He listened. There it was again, that steady presence. The same one he had felt in the morning, in the afternoon, in the rain, in the silence. It had never left. It had only waited for him to notice. He stepped away from the desk, left the room. The hallway welcomed him back into the softer sounds of evening. He walked toward the living room again, but this time he didn't enter. He passed by, moved instead toward the veranda. The door opened with a soft creak. The night had fully arrived now. The sky was deep, full of stars, the same stars, always the same, always different. He stepped outside. The air wrapped around him gently. The breeze had slowed. The world had quieted. This was the hour where everything softened, where the day released its hold, where the mind began to loosen its grip on things it no longer needed to carry. He sat in his chair, the same one, always the same, and looked out. The hillside was darker now, but still visible, still present. The shape of it held steady against the sky. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and breathed. In, out, in, out. The rhythm came easily, no effort, no thought, just being. There had been a time when nights were different, filled with noise, with movement, with energy that refused to settle. But this was something else. This was peace that did not need to prove itself. Peace that did not depend on anything outside of it. Peace that simply was. A voice came softly from inside. Everything all right? He opened his eyes slightly, smiled. Everything is, he said, and he meant it. Not because everything was perfect, but because everything was accepted, and that made all the difference. The voice did not ask more, it did not need to. The door closed gently again, and he was alone, but not alone, never alone. The stars above, the breeze around him, the quiet within him, all of it part of the same presence, the same gentle unfolding. He rested there, letting the night carry him, not thinking, not remembering, not reaching, just resting. And in that rest something deeper settled. Not a thought, not a realization, just a quiet readiness for what comes next. Because even in stillness, life continues, always continues, softly, patiently, unfolding one moment into the next, and somewhere within that unfolding, there's always something new waiting to be felt. Not loud, not dramatic, just new. The breeze moved once more, and the night held him gently, as if preparing him for something he did not yet need to understand. Something that would arrive, just as softly as everything else. The night deepened, not darker in a way that felt empty, but deeper in a way that felt full. The stars had settled into their places now, no longer appearing one by one, but simply there, steady, quiet, unmoving to the eye, yet part of something endlessly in motion. The hillside rested, the house rested. Even the wind seemed to move more slowly, as if it too had decided to soften its pace. Bob remained on the veranda, still in the same chair, still in the same posture, but something within him had shifted, not suddenly, not dramatically, just gently, like the turning of a page you didn't realize you had reached. He opened his eyes, looked out once more, then closed them again, and this time he did not listen outward, he listened inward, to the quiet space beneath everything, the place where thought fades, where memory softens, where identity itself loosens its edges. It was not unfamiliar. He had touched it many times before, in music, in silence, in moments where the world fell away and only presence remained. But now it felt closer, easier to enter, like a room whose door had always been open. But only now did he feel ready to walk fully inside. His breath slowed, not forced, just natural. In, out, in, out. The rhythm matched something deeper, something older than him, older than the house, older than the hills. That same pulse, always there, always steady, life continuing, life continuing, life continuing. A memory came, not of a moment, but of a feeling, standing on a stage long ago, lights bright, voices rising, energy moving through him like a current. At the time, it had felt like everything, like the centre of something vast and powerful, and it had been. But now, that memory did not pull him. It simply rested, like a photograph placed gently on a table, important, but not holding him. He let it pass. Another memory came, a quieter one, sitting at a table, hands passing food, laughter shared, eyes meeting, warmth, connection. He felt that one more deeply, not because it was bigger, but because it had stayed. That is how you know what matters, not by how loud it was, but by how softly it remains. He exhaled slowly, and in that exhale something loosened further, a layer, a weight he hadn't even noticed he was carrying, gone, or perhaps returned. Everything returns. He leaned his head back slightly. The chair creaked softly beneath him. The night held him, and for a moment there was no separation, not between him and the air, not between him and the sound of the breeze, not between him and the quiet itself, just presence, whole, complete, enough. A door opened softly behind him. Footsteps approached, slower now, gentler. Someone sat beside him. No words, just presence. A hand rested lightly on his arm, warm, familiar. He did not open his eyes. He didn't need to. He knew, and they knew, that this moment was not for speaking. It was for sharing, for being, together, in the quiet. Time passed. Or perhaps it didn't. It simply unfolded, without measure, without need. The hand remained, steady, comforting, a reminder that even as everything changes, connection remains, in different forms, in different ways, but always present. Eventually Bob opened his eyes. Slowly. The stars were still there, unchanged. The hillside still held its shape. The house still breathed quietly behind him. But something inside him felt lighter, not empty, just lighter, like a long journey had reached a place of rest. He turned his head slightly, met the eyes of the one beside him. They smiled, soft, understanding. "You tired?" they asked gently. He shook his head. "No," they said. A pause. "Just quiet." They nodded. "That good place," they replied. He smiled. "Yes," he said. "It is." They sat together a little longer, then slowly the hand lifted, not pulling away, just releasing, trusting that what had been shared did not need to be held physically to remain. Bob stood, carefully, his movements slower now, not from weakness, but from awareness, from presence. He turned once more toward the horizon. Though it was night, though the line between sky and sea had softened into darkness, he could still feel it, that vast openness, that endless space. And he felt no need to go further, no need to become more, no need to hold on to anything at all. Because everything he had needed to experience, he had. Everything he had needed to give, he had. And everything that truly mattered remained. He took one final deep breath, in, out. And in that breath there was no beginning, no ending, just continuation, the same quiet pulse, Life continuing, life continuing, life continuing. He turned, stepped inside. The house welcomed him. Soft, still, ready. He moved through it slowly, past the quiet rooms, past the resting shapes of those he loved, past the small details that had become part of his world, and finally to the place where he would rest. He lay down, not heavily, not with effort, just resting. His body eased into stillness. His breath softened further. The night outside continued. The stars watched. The breeze moved. The world turned. And inside, there was peace. Not the kind that ends something, but the kind that completes it. A life not rushed, not cut short, but lived, fully, gently, deeply. A life that had moved through fire and found its way to warmth, through noise and found its way to quiet, through searching and found its way home. And as sleep came, not as something sudden, but as something welcomed. The story did not end. It simply rested, like the night, like the breath, like the steady rhythm beneath everything, still continuing, always continuing, softly, forever softly.